Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders. My name is Chris Shang, and today we are visited by Todd Dewett. He's a five-time TEDx speaker. He is a thought leader and expert in leadership. He's going to share a lot of his wisdom and thoughts here today. Did a lot of background on you and just kind of your experience previous in the management consulting world, working for top firms like Andersen and Ernst Young, before transitioning into becoming a thought leader as well as a keynote speaker in the world of leadership. So tell us a little bit about what that looks like and what you're up to today.
Sure, thanks. I appreciate you having me, Chris. So I'm really lucky, to be honest with you. I followed my heart into business. I was fascinated with how things get made and how people work together to make that happen. That led to an MBA like it has for gazillions of others. And then, yes, big box consulting, Andersen, Ernst and Young. While I was there, I figured out a couple things, which makes me very lucky. One, I find business interesting. Specifically, I learned I find relationships, which is the backbone of anything interesting that happens in business, as absolutely interesting and very often lacking. I also learned I didn't fit in a traditional corporate role. I'm a cantankerous change maker type of person. And it turns out I fit perfectly as an external type of expert advisor, call it what you like, compared to the inside. And so after a few years of doing that, I left and went and got a PhD in organizational behavior from Texas A&M and became a professor. Let me just be an outsider. I'm gonna publish scientific research. I'm gonna advise and consult. And I loved doing that for several years, became tenured senior professor. I was a dean for a little while. And what I discovered was there was limits to that world like any other world. And I really had this itch to jump out and be completely solo, no paycheck, no net, and decided to finally do that. And about the time I did that, I was getting contacted by a firm at the time. It was called lynda.com. And they, of course, famously were purchased by LinkedIn and rebranded eventually as LinkedIn Learning, now one of the premier online learning places on planet Earth. And we got along great. Hey, we like you. Let's make some courses. That's turned into 12 years of a great relationship now of making courses. I think I have over 40 that are still live in the leadership, relationship, careers space, 10 different languages, every country in the world, millions and millions of views, which is crazy. So what I did was fall in love with business and find better places where I fit to enjoy or indulge that interest. The professor thing was great. And then for over a decade now, I've been writing books, giving keynote speeches, and making online courses. And that kind of fits perfectly, if I'm honest.
Fair enough. Um, you mentioned you kind of like went from, getting an MBA, doing the consulting in a more, corporate environment, and then got into teaching. Can you walk us through maybe like I think as you get older too, and you go through different phases of life, different things are important to you. What were some of those things that you think triggered those just different stages, right? Like that maybe personally was going on, mentally you evolved or matured in certain ways, and then made ultimately, the big sacrifice or the big risk, which was becoming a solo entrepreneur, and investing in your own personal brand.
Absolutely. I mean, all of the above. I'll back up and say I've taken a big risk on in my career on multiple occasions. The first probably was leaving EY after having not been in the business that long to go get a PhD. So this is think about this proposition. You're going to leave a prestigious place. Everyone thinks you're a smart guy to work there, and it's good salary for your age. And you're going to go get a PhD, which you think is 4 years. Some do it longer. And you don't know what's on the other end. You don't know if they're going to kick you out, which about 50% of good business schools will let you go in the first year. So what's on the back end? A job teaching and researching for less than industry awesome wages. You make a good six-figure business school salary, but not high, not even mid. Usually they're quite low. So you're going to make a living, but why did I want to take that risk? Well, I was fascinated in studying people issues a lot more than I had a chance to study them as a consultant. I wanted to get into some of the math and the theory and publish scientific research. I also, and this is a big deal for me or anyone that might be listening to your show, I really wanted to feel comfortable and expressive without having to think too much about it. No one fits someplace professionally perfectly, but in the ivory tower, I fit really well. No one cared about things like this at all. They cared about, do you have good ideas? Can you figure out how to publish them in scientific research? And can you teach people and make them go, man, that was really great. And I loved teaching and I was pretty good at the research. And so I thought, frankly, I was going to do that forever. And then to answer your question again, I'm tenured. I got a job for life, a little prestige in this community called Dayton, Ohio, that I loved back in the day. Hi, Dayton, miss you guys. And my phone rang one day, true story. And a person said, "Hey, I was in your class. I'm a manager over here at so and so. I remember you're really funny. A lot of stories you tell. Would you come out to this meeting and tell some stories?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Well, how much do you cost?" And I said, "Oh, nothing. Don't worry about it," which is what all rookies say, which is so funny. And I went out there and I told some stories. It was a bunch of young accountants and had a blast. And soon after, someone offered me a little bit, and that became more and more. Over the years, it turned into an actual slice of something that mattered. But it all started with being honest about what I was interested in and taking risks to go find a better fitting place professionally to allow me to indulge in that interest. And I know the statistics around small business and people going the entrepreneurship route, and it's rough. And I've had setbacks too. But I'm also living proof that if you really want to find that place where you're writing the rules for yourself as you go, there is no other option except to intelligently face those risks and take a leap once in a while.
Absolutely. Yeah, we speak to tons of founders I've spoken to through other formats as well. And yeah, the statistics are backed against you. I mean, I do feel like in today's world, you probably have a better shot at being like a famous rock musician or like a or hip hop artist than you do probably like building the next unicorn, right? But everybody out there is still trying, and every year. That being said, you mentioned your innate interest in just kind of like people and relationships. Like, when did that interest really start formulating in a way where you knew that the corporate structure or just working in an organized environment wasn't necessarily going to help foster or feed that curiosity, and that you needed to go off on your own to do it? And the reason why I asked that is because from curiosity to then making the leap of no safety net, that's, I think, a lot of a lot of what I like to dive into, because for a lot of people listening, a lot of wannabe entrepreneurs, that's the hardest thing to do. And everybody's motivated differently. The conversations they have to have, each founder or entrepreneur has to have is different, whether with themselves or with their support system. So just walk us through what that actually looked like, and maybe you actually spent a few years developing that interest. Maybe again, I don't know what your story is, but like fostering that before you actually took the leap. What gave you the confidence to do that based off of that initial interest?
It's an important question. It's a great question. I mean, I knew I was going to be in the speaking advising space somehow as a teenager because I was that dork at a party. People would go, "Really? That's interesting. Tell me more what you think about that." I was always running my mouth. That's just a gift I was born with. And I had to figure out how to accumulate knowledge worth sharing and the right ways to then share. And when I was at Andersen and Ernst and Young, I recognized so quickly what I had long ago as a teenager in high school. High school is an amazing learning lab if you're smart enough to get past all the oddness we feel to actually pay attention in terms of studying people, because it was obvious that people were acting every day, just like men and women that go to work as adults. They act every day. They want to meet the expectations of their supervisor, their colleagues, their vendor, their customers, etc. And so we act, which is humorous because none of us were trained to be thespians. But anyhow, we go and we act. It's called impression management, and it's not evil at all, but we overdo it extensively on average, such that what I could witness, I didn't have vocabulary for it in high school, built a little bit in college, and much more later as a PhD. What we actually do is leave tons and tons of potential on the table for conversations and performance, collaborative performances within teams that we just don't realize because we neglect communication. We neglect what it means to be a supportive member of a team. We don't think about that. It's horrible to me that it's not even part of our K through 12 education. So I'm sitting there at Ernst and Young watching people censor and act in ways that were so obvious. They think they're acting well, but they're not. I was just thinking to myself, we could do this so much better, so much more honestly, so much more forthright, and get more done. What can I do about that? I went and started researching what a PhD does in the social sciences, in the business school, in a department of management. And it turns out there's all kinds of people and theories trying to understand why we do what we do at work, and maybe how we can relate to people in a way that helps us all do it differently and better. And my first love, in fact, as an academician, was creativity and innovation. What makes teams really try that next level conversation or process innovation, whatever it might be. And it always comes back to whether or not they felt comfortable, psychologically safe, whether or not they knew how to communicate. Well, most people at work have ideas. That's not the problem. The
Yep.
problem is getting others to hear effectively and have conversations effectively. That is the problem, not ideas. We got lots of ideas. So the truth is, I was wanting to be happy and expressive, and I prepared to fail. This will sound strange, but I'm sure you've heard versions of this many times. When I went for the PhD, I was thinking worst thing that happens if I wash out here is I'll find my way back to consulting. At least it's a good living. It fit. It was hard work, very hard, but it fit. And then as a professor, when I later, a decade later, wanted to think about going solo, I did the classic small-time entrepreneur move for multiple years, test the idea as a side hustle to the best of your ability, and save up and put yourself financially in the best position possible to go without a safety net for 2-3 years to really try this dream you're dreaming. Again, worst case, I'm a well-trained social scientist. I could probably find my way back to a university somehow. But the most important probably answer is financially, you really prepare. It's a multi-year thing of trying to say, how much do I need and can I pay my bills? All those things, getting rid of debts, etc. I sold a sweet 75th anniversary black Camaro that was to die for and got a Prius. That's what I mean by preparing. I
Yeah.
got a smart car under my belt there. And then the side hustle. I had probably 6-7 years during that 10 years of being in the classroom where the side hustle was small, then a little bigger. And then the last year I was there, I had to cancel February. They don't like it when you cancel a class, let alone cancel a month. But I was flying everywhere to talk. And so test the idea on the side, let it help prove itself. Financially, you're in good shape. Those two things go together. It's time to jump if you're going to do it.
There you go. And that's a personal sacrifice, right? It's like change of means. You talk about swapping out the Camaro for Prius. That's a big one.
It was a big one. And I had 2 elementary school age children when I left the paycheck for life as a professor.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's I think the part that a lot of people, have a hard time doing is digging deep and then changing that level of comfortability for something that they want to truly believe and have faith in themselves, but sometimes it's a little bit wavering and that's what prevents them from making that leap. But lots of great points of advice of like how to do it smartly and strategically to kind of set yourself up for that path. If it is something that's really passionate for you, you should do it in this way where it's hopefully going to at least mitigate some of that risk for you mentally.
That's right. Be
Um,
methodical.
yeah. Would love to dive into just kind of like, you mentioned doing this as part of your research and now just being out in the real world environment and doing this, talking about people and relationships, which I think is, I mean, anecdotally, at least without having a research background myself, but I think it's changed so much the landscape in the professional environment given post pandemic, because now everybody is hybrid or most are working from home even. And so when we're having conversations with people, we're having conversations in their home where sometimes, at least now, I think people are a little bit better about it. But before, right after the pandemic, you had kids running around, their animals hopping up on laptops. So it's very personal, right? You started to come into these personal spaces, and so I think it changed. I think it definitely like from the sales side of things and growth and how we look at go to market, which is my background, but it changed a lot of like what traditionally was a very like binary relationship into something that was a lot more of a gray area. And so we'd love to kind of get your thoughts of maybe how your view and perspective has changed pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and then now that it's settled into it where it's not as much of a conversation topic and it's become more of this adopted part of like our new normal. What are you noticing now?
Well, I mean, you nailed a lot of it, and it's very important to talk about that, the switch to remote work, the change in how people view jobs at their base has gone through different phases, from the Great Resignation to quiet quitting to all the acronyms and phrases and jargon we've heard in the last 5 years. Um, Honestly, this will sound self-serving, it's not. Honestly, my observation is that I fell in love with a body of knowledge, an area, leadership, teams, relationships, all those micro slices of it, like communication, motivation, conflict, so on, all the people stuff. And I was out there preaching authenticity, for example, one of the big flags I've carried over the years, long before the pandemic. And sometimes people go, I love it. You're so right. And other times they go, okay, yeah, you're a good storyteller. I see that could be useful, but we got work to do. And I'm gonna have to bark orders sometimes. So stop telling me to be nice all the time, Todd. And there wasn't pure believers everywhere. And then all of these things started with the pandemic, and it hasn't stopped at all because of the advent of AI. And people are now asking themselves, like, for example, I've done so many workshops, talks, and courses around, managing in tough times or when change is imminent. Well, that's happening more and more and more. The topics I fell in love with are simply more important than they used to be. Let me give you an example. Shared leadership. So how do you understand remote leadership, which you better understand these days compared to 10 years ago, which it existed then, just not in huge numbers. Well, there's a lot of little tiny things there. You've got a team of 10, they meet once a week on a virtual. Well, don't do the same thing every time. Mix up that process. Don't have the supervisor run the meeting every single time. Share that across people. Do some things that are unplanned that you didn't tell them about. I could go on and on and on. Utter transparency. I've been saying this for 30 years almost. We need more, not less transparency. And when things get tougher at work, what do we usually do? Less transparency. When the answer is not a perfect answer, but the best answer, more transparency. Even remotely, you can do that. As you know, this big decision was made. In your inbox, you're all going to see the charts that actually explain it. This was not fly-by-night seat of the pants. We actually looked at the numbers, and this shows you the rationale, an explanation, if you will, for why we made this decision. There's been versions of that forever. Some managers don't do much. They say, do what I tell you. Others explain probably too much and are scared to make a decision. What I know is that the average has always been not quite enough, because when you let employees start to have ambiguity that is completely unnecessary, they will fill that with ideas that are not productive, I promise you. And the tendency for that to happen has gone up in this new work age where so many people are distributed geographically in a lot of ways. So when I look at authenticity, when I look at kindness, when I look at listening, oh my goodness, it's hard to be a comfortable, effective listener on these virtual calls because you're never sure when to jump in. When I think of sharing leadership and collaborating, other things I could go into, they all are still important like they were before these different evolutions started. They're simply far more important now. I look at AI. I was reading this morning. I'm no expert, but everyone's reading about it, of course, because it's affecting everything. And they're talking about the percentage of jobs of different types that they anticipate being disrupted and or really let go of. No more need for human labor in certain ways. And it's going to be huge. So I'm not sure since the Industrial Revolution, I'm not sure if we've ever seen anything. This will be bigger than the internet in terms of job displacement. And how do you explain this as it's happening? So it used to be the hardest thing for a manager to do, for corporate to do, is to say, oh, we actually screwed up and now we're going to do a layoff or a right sizing or a downsizing or whatever they want to do. And we're going to tell our middle managers through scripted things that aren't really transparent and honest to convey that to everybody. And then it kind of ruffles feathers, makes some people angry, because number one question from all employees is, well, I didn't get let go. That's amazing. But are we done doing that yet? And the response to that is almost always, I'm not sure, but I think we're good to go. We don't expect anything new coming. This is the opposite of transparency. And what I love to tell people is that the more we get into disruptive realities, such as AI, and I don't think we understand it yet. It's going to be another decade before we go, holy cow, that was fascinating. And that helped and that hurt. This is the time, on large, for middle managers, hopefully, to help convince some seniors, because the seniors are still dominated by boomers who come from a very different reality that I'm preaching right now. That, in fact, as hard as this is, more transparency instead of less is going to be one of the bits of oil that gears us up, man, and lets us actually get through a tough time that's coming, for sure.
Awesome. Two words you kept on saying a lot of in that description was authenticity and transparency. Um, and I agree 1,000% that, if it wasn't relevant before, it's definitely relevant now. And it's even more relevant, I think as we're going to the future, because I think a lot of these question marks with things like AI, like we don't know what that means. Company doesn't know how it's going to impact them from an organizational perspective, right? From the leadership all the way down to, the middle management to the entry level employees, and what's going to do. And if senior management is looking at possibly doing those things, right? Um, would love to kind of we love to provide like actionable takeaways. When you speak about this make it maybe break it up into two sections, but when we speak about being more authentic, right? What does that mean? And what are some examples of when you come in and you're talking to a leader or an organization of ways of being more authentic? And does that, I mean, I guess that kind of ties to transparency, but you can kind of break it down for us.
Sure. I mean, authenticity is means something a little different to everyone, and how much is appropriate, necessary, smart, etc., is going to vary across people, across teams, across cultures. That makes sense. Having said that, the general idea is being a little more uncensored, real, and honest in how you look, how you behave, how you speak, and a little less overtly polished on purpose to meet the needs of others. That's always going to be the dominant part of people working together in a social context, because that's respect for everyone around us, of course. But we have to come off that a step or two towards authenticity to find a new norm where people are more comfortable speaking up. In fact, it sounds funny the way I sometimes talk about it, but this is the backbone of innovation. You don't get innovation by decree. You get it through trust building and rapport. And if you don't have that, no one's taking any principled risks on behalf of anyone. So this authenticity thing isn't just a kumbaya, fun, people-oriented thing a guy like me talks about. No, it's the backbone of better conversations, more trust, rapport, and then the real conversations about how we're going to change and improve and innovate. So I would tell you this. I know that cultures vary widely, even within North American companies. They vary widely from very conservative, we all wear suits and speak a certain way, to very liberal to casual, everything in between. That's fine. Wherever you are, you want to first understand the norms that define your workplace, and then say to yourself, how I look, how I speak, how I act, how can I put a toe in the water? Hey, Todd, am I supposed to listen to you go, this makes complete sense, of course, and then on Friday, I've been wearing my suit, and on Monday, I'm going to wear Birkenstocks and blue jeans and really speak my mind? No, that's going to be weird, and that's going to get you in trouble. So I would say, number one, always, if you care about authenticity, and this probably you didn't expect this answer, one, always care about being a top performer. Define that as you see fit, but always strive, always to be a top performer, because it's shocking how much more latitude you are given at work when you are a top performer. And number two, put a toe in the water, don't dive in the deep end, which means start intentionally, slowly, carefully, deviating a little bit to see how people react. If you were whatever, on a casual day, you're wearing your favorite Hawaiian shirt, some small thing that's not consequential. So you can watch people react. And you know what? Most people react on the small toe in the water, and they kind of smile and laugh. Maybe even we have a talk about it, which is great. And maybe they even reciprocate, which is even better. And then you push a little further, and 1 year later, that team feels considerably different and more honest. What most people don't know is they think honesty is scary, and it can be. But at work, the better we get at forthright conversation, more candor, shaped kindly, of course, but more candor, what we get is a team that's more agile and quicker and more innovative and willing to try things. How much is that worth? It's worth a ton, which is why people pay me to talk about it.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think like, you know, I've been thinking about this quite a bit. We just do these like in-person round tables with founders, and we usually get everything from like post-seed to publicly traded company founders. And one of the common threads is like how lonely of a journey it is, and how isolating it is. And it doesn't preclude me from then like thinking about, the impact on mental health and all that stuff. And I think from a founder's perspective, like there's stats around this too, where like 73% of founders, feel some issue with their mental health, and 83% of them actually are not public about that. And a large chunk of them aren't even public about that to their co-founders. And I think it's because they are in this place of like having to be a leader to and having all the answers to their teams and their employees, and then also still answering to a board, which is like, for the most part, capital focused and
Yeah,
profitability focused and that kind of thing. And so it doesn't always mesh well with how you are trying to grow a business
sure.
or grow the culture, grow a team. Um, and I bring that up is like because we're about to enter May, which is like Mental Health Awareness Month, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs go through this. And
Yep.
maybe you've gone through you've told the ups and downs of it being a solo entrepreneur, even though you were very well positioned for it. And I'm sure you've interacted with founders that have gone through bouts of that where it's been a struggle. What are your thoughts on that? And I think that uh, and how do you become more, I guess, like authentic and transparent as a leader in that kind of position,
Sure.
where then you're being respectful and also being conscientious of the boundaries between, say, employees and then say a board, right?
Sure.
Where you have different motivators on each side of that coin.
Well, it's a great topic. I would start by saying, a lot of leaders, especially the older ones, the boomers and the older millennials, still believe erroneously that to be humble and talk about mental health and related topics is going to harm their otherwise wonderful confidence that they show people and hurt the trust people have in them. And that is generally not true.
Yeah,
It is true when someone is being humble, admitting mistakes and failures and setbacks, things I love talking about. A lot, mental health, a lot. Yeah, that's going to be seen as a massive departure from the current norm. And by definition, that's going to be perceived as a problem for you and could affect how you're viewed. But what I love to tell people is that I know you're not talking about those imperfections we all sometimes face often. I know you're not. That's why I have a job. My job is to tell you to stop never talking about them and find the 2, 3, 4 times a year, not 2, 3, 4 times each week, to properly talk about them because that does something amazing to everyone watching you. It
yeah,
makes you human in their eyes and more approachable. And without you even trying to, it validates their humanity because they know, and they're managing impressions so you don't pay attention to it. They know they're imperfect and have screwed up and don't know this, even though they know that, etc. And when they see a person of some status say, did I tell you about that project that I tanked and how much it hurt me and what I learned? It's amazing how cathartic that is
yeah,
and makes them more willing to be authentic themselves and to engage that person. Once again, the flow of conversation is increasing for no cost just because we're brave enough to talk about authenticity. So one of the ways that the crazy, colorful Gen Z might save us is that they are normalizing the discussion
yeah,
and the acceptance that we all experience mental health issues. Now, how we're going to make this transition in the next 2025 as the boomers finally fully exit, millennials take over, Zs will be dominating middle management by then. I don't know, because at the same time, we might, you and I have talked about some interesting themes here that are related. We might be seeing a significant, I don't know how to define that,
mhm,
job-based reduction because of AI. So the limits of all the pro people stuff people like me like to talk about as important for running teams and organizations is simply going to be that much more effective because we might have an average level of change, I'll say, that is higher than it was for the last 3 decades.
yeah. It's a good point. Um, we're running up on time here, but there's a few things I wanted to cover before we go. One was I saw your TEDx talk on creativity,
Mm.
uh, and how to bring creativity into these kind of like structured environments or into the corporate environment. And can you talk us through a little bit about that and kind of like maybe summarize that 20-minute talk?
Sure. For me, it's a personal topic because I remember working a real job, which I didn't have for too many years, and thinking to myself, I want to say so and so. I agree. I don't agree. I've got an idea, none of which I said because I sat there thinking, I'm not sure I can articulate it. I don't think I like that person. I know that they're busy and want to get out of here, et cetera. It's that we think of a million reasons to censor. And so it was a selfish beginning to caring about that topic. And during the PhD, it became studying factors inside orgs, especially at the team level, that impede the real flow of next level conversations. And it comes down to very simple things like how and when we give feedback and how much negativity we'll allow, whether we justify jerk behavior, which is still common in a lot of places, uh, whether we give resources that allow people to explore ideas within the scope of their job, whether or not we put it on the eval forms when we evaluate people to show them that we value this as an outcome. To not try, stretch, grow, and be creative over there is going to be a detriment to you as we grow. There's 20 things that are framing whether or not someone sits there and censors or says something. And it turns out, Amy Edmondson got famous at Harvard for talking about psychological safety. Great concept. And there's been many versions of that over time. And it's true. I don't want to oversimplify, but it's true. If we can get people to stop being scared at work, which we can't eliminate for a lot of reasons, but we certainly can reduce, you'll have very, very, very different conversations. And when I think about creativity and innovation, I just look at all of the classic studies, and there's tons of companies that have found great success in that market. And then, IBM comes to mind. They barely saved themselves and switched to a services firm at some point. But their founder once said famously, what did he say? It was at the very beginning of personal computers. And the guy said, was it Watson? I can't remember his name. He said, come on, those are interesting. I think maybe there's a world market for 3 of those things. And he kept betting on the mainframes, and it ran into all the problems that we know historically. So I just like to remind people that if you've been successful at the individual level or at the org level, good for you. You better care now more than ever before about creativity, because what got you there ain't going to sustain you for the next decade.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that goes back to maybe some like an original point that you're making a little bit earlier, which is make sure that you're the best at your role, your job. That gives you a lot of credence and a lot of leeway to kind of push and thread the needle, whether from, a relationship or a personal or how your visual appearance to even then the ideas and the creativity that you bring up.
Sure.
People are going to look at you a little bit differently if they already know you're bringing the A game every single time, right?
Not
Versus,
even fair sometimes, but it's absolutely true.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Versus, yeah, I get it, 1,000%. On that note, any other takeaways, last minute takeaways you would like to give people in terms of, we kind of touched on AI and how we don't know how to quantify the implications yet, but obviously it's going to make a lot of what you're talking about probably more important, maybe more of a priority. Um, but any other additional thoughts you want to shed on that in terms of
Sure.
where you think maybe like not 5 years from now of what AI is going to be, but like just the conversation? Because I know we're still doing like it is like the very early internet days. There's been a lot of over-promising, under-delivering from the AI solutions that are out there now. I hear that across the market. But anything that you think like for the next 6 months, year, 2 years, that we can expect out of, the from a macroeconomic standpoint that you kind of foresee?
Well, I appreciate you asking that, but I'm definitely not a macro econ guy. What I can tell you is, that anyone out there who's a manager or aspires to be in the managerial class sometime soon, just because you're not a techie and you want to become a manager, a leader, call it what you like, does not mean that you need to not worry about AI. AI is right now, when we think about managing people, through a bunch of different tools. Who's going to win? You're correct. It's just not known yet. It's very early days. But from how you write an email to how you write a speech to how you capture notes in a meeting, AI is showing up all over daily management activities, not just big number crunching, big data decision making backroom stuff every day in the face with your people. Go start reading about that. You want to be the person in the room when someone above you, a level or two, starts talking about these tools and how they're affecting our workflow and our interactions. You want to be one of the guys that has a clue what this person is talking about, so they'll have some faith in you to jump in and start using them.
Yeah, great piece of advice. I agree too. I think if you're not learning about it, if you're not deploying it, you're just gonna be on the consumer end, and you're gonna be it's gonna that those are the you're gonna be your job is probably gonna be up for grabs after that point.
I
So it's
fear that you're
probably
correct.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Todd, for taking the time today. It was a great, super enlightening conversation. Thank you for sharing your experience too, and just your background leading up to where you are today. Congrats on the success so far, and can't wait to catch you in person sometime.
Thank you much, man. Pleasure all mine.